Hello, everyone. Welcome to the CUBE Pod, episode 116. I'm John Furrier with Dave Vellante. Dave, slow salute this week.
Hello, John.
Slow.
I know.
It's been a long week.
I just saw you in DC. I'm in Tennessee. You're in New York. It's good. Good to see you.
It's a slow salute because, man, I'm tired. And just all the action yesterday, the New York Stock Exchange, I flew back from Nvidia. Like there's like a crypto party. Solana's ETF went live. It's a huge celebration. And, 7 tech IPOs have been over $1 billion. 5 of them been at the NYSE. More and more actions coming here. So it's very interesting. They leave Nvidia, which was a huge AI party, and Solana. I just crossed the chasm between two universes: the AI universe and the crypto universe. As we said, David, they're bounded by power, so they all get the same energy issues. But Nvidia had an amazing event. You were there. I mean, so much to talk about Nvidia. $5 trillion company that hit the news yesterday or the day before. And just unstoppable. You were there. You had great notes, by the way. I saw your notes, and you saw Jensen's backlog basically saying, "I got a pipeline. I got a pipeline till the cows come home."
For people who didn't see it, he put up a chart, and the first bar was Hopper sales, unit sales in 2023 and 2024, and it was a decent sized bar. And then he put up this other bar, which was Blackwell sales to date, which this was the high bar for Hopper for 2 years. It was already here just this year through October. And then he showed the next 2 years, it was like off the charts at $500 billion in sales. And it was like, I saw that and I go, oop, this stock's going up. And sure enough, the thing just exploded. All the analysts who were there were like, the Wall Street analysts just jumped on it. And, we're going to talk about it, but Jensen just is the master at playing to whomever is the host home court. When he's in Taiwan, he's going to light up Taiwan. When he's at Dell or HPE, those guys are going to light up the world. And of course, this was all about, making America great and winning the AI race and energy policy. I mean, he just laid it on thick, and he defended his premise that we should diffuse the U.S. AI tech stack globally. He made a very strong argument there. There's a counter argument that I'd love to talk to you about, and you know where I stand on this, and I know where you stand on it. But it was an amazing event. I mean, it was really.
It was probably the best one I've ever seen from him, and I'll tell you why I liked it. It was one, he did a great masterful performance as he normally does. But in DC, the graphics that they had, the videos that they had, the theme that they had, it was so patriotic, but not in a we're the greatest country. And it was more of like, hey, we got the greatest country in the world, and we got work to do, and all this hubbub, all this noise around Trump this, and he didn't say that, but that's in my words, but all this political problems. And he's actually just shining a light on just the straight signal from the noise, which is we can build these freaking factories in America. And we need labor to do them. And it's new kinds of labor. You need machines to build the machines, and you need people to fix those machines and build those machines that build the machine. And he made an amazing case for how the world is being rebuilt with AI native factories, AI edge, which we can get to later. But I was so motivated and inspired. Just almost like got little chills in some of those videos about made in America thing, and it wasn't like made in America, like it was just like legit signal, and just he laid it out, and obviously we're in an inflection point for accelerated computing, and talk about the transistor and the power scaling has stopped a decade ago, and this new inflection point with new scaling laws, he laid that out. It was just really it's on point, and I think. That Nvidia will be looked at as a case study, in my opinion, major company, not just from a performance standpoint, but in terms of the societal world of the election. And it's just, I can see the pieces working together. It's now clear, and I think it's clear to everyone in DC, hence all the reporters that were there that were, trying to ask him more political questions. But Jensen Huang is now thrust into the political realm. I saw a guy up there, I'm like, man, he could be president. And like that was the kind of stuff that's going through the line. This is the kind of stuff we want to hear from leaders in politics, not the CEO of a tech company. So I liked it. I was pro narrative DPS. I love the message, besides all the tech and stuff. He's now a political figure, Dave.
Yeah.
That's a reality.
I, I think there's a couple things here. So first of all, they're the world's most valuable company. And I think it is incumbent upon Nvidia to rise all ships and be the tide that rises all ships. And you're seeing that. If you think about it, we saw from the cloud guys this week, even though, I mean, it's, Google crushed it, Amazon really crushed it. I'm sure we're going to talk about that. Microsoft had a very strong quarter, but it was, the stock was off a little bit, but still crushing AI. So Jensen's supporting the cloud. We know he's supporting the neo clouds, he's investing directly in CoreWeave. We've had Lambda on, and Nebius, and Chase Lockmiller's company, Crusoe. And so he's supporting those build outs. He's supporting the LLM vendors investing, directly potentially in open AI. So he's got that piece going. He's definitely supporting the on-prem slash hybrid players like Dell and HPE and Supermicro and those guys. He's now taking on Telecom. I know you have some thoughts on that. But he's basically partnering up with Nokia to try to bring, and he was very forceful about this. We want to bring, U.S. excellence. We want to be the U.S. to be dominant again in telco because we lost that in the 4G, 5G space. And he's trying to team up with Nokia. And again, I know you have some thoughts on that. And then he's also teaming up to go after autonomous vehicles. They've been in that business for a better part of a decade, and he's going after robotics. So he basically has his fingers in every single vector of opportunity, plus I'm sure some that we haven't thought of yet. And to me, one of the most impressive things about Jensen's presentations is he talks about, look, we're not just a chip company, we are a systems company. He talks about that, but then yes, we have CUDA. But then he laid out all these libraries that they have and these vertical libraries that they have, whether it's in healthcare or financial services or automotive or on and on and on. This tooling and the models and the small language models, the large language models, the libraries that they have that are vertically oriented. And that is just a tremendous gift to the industry. And this is where I think he's really right, is we have to diffuse. That's what he means by the tech stack. It's not just, the Blackwells or the Vera Rubin chips. It's also all that surrounding infrastructure and tooling that he wants developers to lean into and be basically addicted to. It reminded me, John, of a much more calm and less sweaty Balmer. Developers, developers, developers. And Jensen was, very articulate in the importance of attracting those developers in China, where, of course, he points out often that 50% of the world's AI developers live in China, and then half of the American AI developers happen to be Chinese. And so he wants to diffuse his technology aggressively. And the last thing I'll say, which was a real treat, was he brought in Energy Secretary Chris Wright, which was a surprise to everybody. And it's a total 180 from the previous administration, which was trying to, they had these opaque rules about technology diffusion generally and AI specifically. The total flip now we're seeing in this administration with regard to energy and technology diffusion goes into crypto, which you've been covering like a madman.
I mean, I think you're right on. I mean, there's a couple of things that came out of that Jensen's speech, and also the Q&A. The Secretary of Energy was there. It's a great bonus. The energy was at the bottom of the stack, if you notice that. So that was a very key point. Like the whole new stack is like that. It's not the physical. It's like there used to be like the cabling that was the physical layer. Right now it's energy, right? And so the thing that got me is that you mentioned the telecom. The AI factories are so obvious to everyone, and this is a big focus. But the edge, there's going to be AI factories at the edge. So first you're going to do is get the telecom. And then I asked my question in the one-on-one. You were there. You were next to me. The hidden little smart bomb in the question. He essentially confirmed that they will have micro factories, which means metro. And when you're a metro, you have, it's like distributed computing, like networking. And remember, last year he said MKV cache is the OS for AI factories, which is essentially networking is the OS. If you have the network, you could do it. Now, some nuances here. If you look at the cloud wave, the people who made all the value extraction from cloud growth wasn't the network telecom thing, even though they were instrumental in connecting people. It was the SaaS was captured by Google and Apple and Amazon, but the lion's share of was the middleman, the app stores, those transactions and other things, but mainly those two companies. In this new wave, the networks can actually extract value because AI factories can monetize and turn them on faster. So I find that fascinating, and we're going to do a deep dive on that. But you mentioned Telecom and Nokia. The thing about Jensen's American technology narrative that he had really was about what he said was once in a lifetime technology platform shift led by American technology. And he said computing now underpins every industry, quote, mainstreaming of computer technology. I think that kind of already happened. I think infusing it into all aspects. And this American theme wasn't really picked up by a lot of people, but of the three major telecom infrastructure players, there's only really three. There's Nokia, which bought Alcatel-Lucent and Vellante, Ericsson, and Huawei. Okay, one's Chinese, they're out, right? Ericsson's hard to work with, some say, and I'm going to confirm that with multiple people. They're good, but Nokia is almost, perfect for an American infrastructure project, right? They got Bell Labs. They have a huge footprint. So that 6G announcement has more meat on the bone, Dave. I think there's going to be a lot more in this AI era of telecommunications where AI is coming into telecom. Nvidia is that, not let's use AI for networking. No, they're the AI factory bolted onto telecom. Okay, that is unbelievable. You get a DGX Spark, those little bricks, and you bolt it onto a light post or in a retail outlet hanging on a wall next to an access point. You have full AI factory at the edge. So I think, and this aerial RAN computer thing, this ARC message, again, this is all hiding in plain sight. It's really, really important. And I sat down with the GM and SVP of Telecom Group, Soma and Chris, who runs BizDev. They're all agreed. Grid computing is coming back. And grid is just not just energy grid, it's grid computing. Remember the old BitTorrent days when you borrow, so the idea was you use other P2P technology. I think AI could get really, really good at that kind of algorithm, meshing up networks. So I think there's going to be a huge telecom boom that Nvidia is going to light up. Metaphor, unintended. So there's so much CUDA-X action, this CUDA software that can be brought in. I'm just very bullish on Nvidia right now. I just think this is from a product perspective, not from a stock price perspective, but they're teeing things up. They could literally make the telecoms the new game in town. And we've always been commenting that they missed the boat. They move slower than glaciers. I said that on the CUBE 3 MWCs ago. I think now's their time with Nvidia to just take over. They own the data. They can manage services into all verticals, retail, emergency rooms, operating rooms. Let
me ask you a question on this, because I don't know much about telecom other than MWC, but it seems to me that Jensen laid this out, that the aspiration is to flip the U.S. position, which is a laggard position, into a leader. With they lagged in 4G and 5G, but they want to make 6G a leader. So to your point, Nvidia introduced ARC, which is a domain-specific computing platform for wireless, and they highlighted Aerial, AERIAL, which is a CUDA-X in the CUDA-X radio libraries that support that. And they put $1 billion in this deal. And so, but here's my question. Does Nokia have the chops? You mentioned the patent portfolio. Thank you, U.S. government. They got for the AT&T breakup. And they've got a strong position in private 5G. But to your point, it's Huawei and Ericsson that dominate the big CapEx infrastructure of 4G and 5G build out. Obviously, Huawei is dominant in China. We see them at MWC, these huge, amazing booths. Ericsson is the other one. And will the position, here's my question, will the position in private 5G allow them to win this global race? And is Nvidia enough of a lever that they can flip that dynamic where US is a laggard and turn it into a leader? What's your take on that?
It's a very complicated question. I'd say first, you got those three major infrastructure players dominating infrastructure. Okay, Nokia is also just more American friendly from a sovereignty standpoint, so it aligns with them today. I think going forward, you got to count out Huawei because also American agenda. Why would Nvidia partner?
Wait, why would you count out Huawei? They got a strong local market. They can sell outside of the US and they do very well there, don't they? Why would you discount? And they got great tech.
Well, and in the short term, you saw the news. Trump's in China right now. There's like a little Cold War going on with China. So, I think Nvidia is they're putting the toes in the water. So, like, just downstream, yeah. What does full adoption look like? It's a different question.
All right, well, carry on with your thought. I wouldn't count out Huawei, but go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
I mean, all infrastructure has to be changed, right? So everyone's up to grab. But in terms of Jensen and Nvidia, they have this is a new plan, right? This is not yet public. This is just they're telegraphing. So I'm just reading the tea leaves. The Nokia announcement specifically was we're partnering with Nokia for 6G and some 5G stuff. So because there's a lot of stuff in wireless that is kind of like a bit sideways. For instance, RAN, we've been covering ORAN and RAN. AI RAN is complicated because a lot of the splitting of spectrum efficiency. He mentioned spectral efficiency, but was done to manage these frequencies for voice and data, not only data centric. So there's a thing called 7.2x split, 7.2x split spectrum on 5G. That's a huge issue because all the people that are in the weeds, the people I talked to, are experts that, hey, it's optimized for certain things and not very well designed for full data factory, full data centric, tsunami of data, because the data growth is only going to get bigger. So all those tunes. Now back to the three infrastructure providers. They're just infrastructure providers. There's service providers, Telecom, Verizon, T-Mobile, all these people. They're the ones that are going to be looking for lean into this because they're the ones who are going to make the money. Of course, the infrastructure gets a piece of the action, but it's going to be the service providers, the networks, the carriers, so to speak. Whatever word you want to use, carrier, service provider, but think AT&T, think T-Mobile. T-Mobile is leaning in heavily, and so whoever jumps in with the Nvidia direction will help them steer the ship. So AI for RAN is not fully baked. This is what we're working on. It's research for MWC, and we're going to get a narrative there. But there's it's like I got 10 reasons here that I wrote down on why it won't work with different situations. But get everything.
So, okay, so you're optimistic that the US can lead. I guess the wild card to me is Nvidia. I mean, if when you have these industry transitions, it creates opportunities and creates a vacuum, and then Nvidia is trying to fill that void. It just seems to me that those who have the capex installed now, maybe you didn't mention the over the top vendors, but they also participated in the cloud, in the telco build out. I don't know enough about it to know if Nokia's position. I guess that comes back to that private 5G question. That's really where they dominate, and private networks, and that's big opportunity for AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a starting line for Nvidia and Nokia. They don't even have the references on it. My thesis coming into for research on this, Dave, is you and I talked about this in great detail over the past couple of weeks. Hyperconvergence is coming to the edge. I use that word because we covered that like a blanket when we first started this SiliconANGLE, theCUBE, and Wikibon back in 2010. Remember early days of hyperconvergence. In the edge, wireless and wireline hyperconverge into one thing with an AI factory. That's inevitable. That means all multi-protocol wireless and wireline, including Ethernet, Wi-Fi, and physical Ethernet, will merge. And that'll be one seamless device. So as a user, you're just connecting, and you can put these things everywhere. If you have an AI factory and you have unlimited bandwidth, if you can manage it that way, and you use 6G as kind of an InfiniBand. short distances on mesh radios with high frequency, high throughput. You're going to connect, it has to be mesh networks. So that's our future. And if that happens, how small can the AI factory node be? Right. So, and then you do micro factories. Put one in New York City, for instance, or metro areas. Amazon talked about this last time we talked to them last year for the Prometheus chip. They have that out there, and they have a bunch of other, satellite to terrestrial technologies. So the networking is the operating system in AI factories. That's our thesis that we put out there. Jensen said it last year. It's all playing out. Networking is the key. And whoever can control it and monetize it, or control the data, have the data and the network will win. And look what Nvidia did with InfiniBand. Would there be supercomputing AI factories without InfiniBand? Maybe.
Well, what?
Without InfiniBand.
No.
InfiniBand connected everything. They connected Blackwells for, and now they got all kinds of network fabrics. So the word fabric is now like a storage fabrics. These are all co-designed. That was their big message, extreme co-design. That is a standard business playbook. We do it with our big content. We co-design with our customers. Our best programs are co-designed.
Well, he didn't really explain that. He didn't really explain it. I inferred the same thing, co-design with your partners and customers, but I think by co-design, he's talking more about like Oracle and Apple integrating hardware and software together and taking the whole systems view.
Yes, that's what he means.
And vertically integrating their stack,
So let me give you an example of what I think co-design means. I think it's, like I said, let's just say theCUBE wanted to partner with Nvidia. We had some magic technology, memory technology. And we would go to Nvidia, we'd say, hey, let's do a deal. And they'd be like, great. Here's the software development kit. Here's a Jetson and go use the Thor chip, whatever, and go. We would have to use our engineering resources to build everything. Okay, test it and run it, and then bring it back to Nvidia and say, see, and their engineers would look at it and say, you're in. I mean, I'm oversimplifying the process, but gone are the days of Nvidia saying, hey, can you take our stuff and we'll work with you to build it? No. They're saying we're going to make the market the factory. And then whoever does that gets embedded into the system in his once in a lifetime platform shift. And they're extracting the rents downstream. That'd be unbelievable. So, imagine if you're the storage fabric that's the best for AI factories. I mean, it's not hard to swap that out, man. Right? If you're sitting next to the Grace Blackwell system, you're in the machine, and you have other connected advantages. Like when the AI factories start connecting to other AI factories. So I think that's, to me, an intentional business development strategy that they have, and they said it on stage multiple times: extreme co-design.
Right, but to be clear on that, I think it is both, NVIDIA and its partners, but it's primarily an NVIDIA-led full stack engineering philosophy and discipline. That it definitely includes, integrating LLMs and interconnects and any networks and power and data center infrastructure, but it's really about optimizing the whole system, and that is part of NVIDIA's secret sauce. And that's about NVIDIA's full stack. I mean, look, IBM invented this idea of vertical integration in the tech industry with the System 360, which is interesting. Jensen referenced that several times in his talk, and IBM, I think, hopes to recreate that with quantum. And you had that virtual integration with Microsoft and Intel, and now NVIDIA is taking on that whole stack itself. It's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. I mean, I'm obviously a big fan of it. I think it creates a massive moat. It is the mother of all lock-ins, and over time you could get competition with other innovators that are more kind of horizontally focused, Android versus Apple sort of argument there. But right now, I mean, this extreme co-design is working, and it's what has allowed NVIDIA to be, I think miles ahead of most of the other, competitors, maybe with the possible exception of China / Huawei / the energy grid of China.
Hey, the big trays are going down behind me. I don't know if you can hear
Yeah.
trades in the background. It's
Yes.
fun to watch the traders. I got to say, this is like our office here. It is our office, but it's like a luxury box looking down on the baseball field and all the traders running down there. And you can see who's got the best mojo and who's the fastest on the floor. It's like,
It's funny, there's a
it's
lot
like
of red behind you, but the market's green today. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah, over your
that's the tape. That's the tape. It's not tape anymore. It's digital, but the puts are getting killed. Calls are some green, mostly tested on Amazon.
Amazon's crushing it today. We got to talk about that. But let's just wrap on GTC. I mean, Secretary Wright. There was kind of it was a surprise. Jensen came out for the AMA and said, "Where's the secretary? Where's the secretary?" People were like, "What? Who's he talking about?" And then Chris Wright walks out on the stage. Chris Wright said, "This is the AI." He said it's the next Manhattan Project, and it was very clear. These guys are saying we're going to lead. Now it's interesting. The energy secretary is there because everybody's talking about energy. Of course, all the journalists and the mainstream media talks about how energy is the big gate. I actually think we're going to solve the energy problem because if we don't solve the energy problem, we're going to lose this race, and there's just too much at stake. So yes, you got to have the energy, but I think when folks like Amazon and Microsoft and Google and others build data centers, and Abilene, they're just going to, put energy right there. They're going to build their own power plants right there. They're not going to rely exclusively on the grid. People are worried that it's going to, like in Virginia, it's going to suck up all the energy and it's going to raise prices. That I think will be dealt with either attacks on the big players or they'll just build their own power plants and right there, like they're doing in Abilene, they're dropping, liquid gas, gas powered turbines right there, and it makes just making their own energy with local resources. So I think that's going to be kind of a problem that this industry will solve because they have to solve it with whether it's LNG
No,
or
they have to
whatever.
think that American needs to up their ability to produce energy, period. You look at China versus
100%.
America, we're getting crushed. And I think it will be solved. I think, kind of out there on this for the philosophy, but I think technology will actually get better than the AI side, and we're going to get efficiencies. The physical AI world is coming fast, and that was one of the newer stars that came out of that. Again, it's not a new narrative for Nvidia, but other people, Michael Dell has done his presentation. You went to his investor meeting. It's agents and then right to physical AI. When you see crypto and AI having this moment where in real world assets on chain or real world AI happening, it's converging, right? So I think the physical environment, buildings, cars. There was a tweet where someone said Elon's got a plan to have his Teslas talk to other Teslas and recharge and sharing energy. If you're, if you're, Nvidia or anyone else, you don't want to have private energy networks, or maybe you do. Like, I mean, what if Teslas can share their energy to other Teslas?
Well, they have to do that for other reasons. They need Byzantine fault tolerance to make full self-driving work. And so, yeah, the Teslas will be talking to other Teslas for a lot of reasons. But I mean, there's no doubt energy is
sharing energy between the two, and one's charging, you can send. So like, this is like the whole grid concept. So I think it's a huge issue. Again, in that stack that you talked about, the energy was at the bottom, like the physical layer was energy. Without energy, the stack doesn't work.
I mean, Wright said if the U.S. doesn't solve this problem, expand electric generating capacity, it loses the AI race, period. They were clear on that. Of course, Jensen agreed and said that every form of energy has to be deployed. But, there's going to be a lot of AI factory power, in my view. And Jensen's going to drive efficiency with, he talked about Grace Blackwell's 10x Hopper's performance with only 50% of the power. And so he's on that curve with that extreme co-engineering. And so I think that problem is going to be solved. The other thing is the 80-20 rule. Jensen's dogma is basically we got to have 80% of the developers consuming our stack. Worldwide consumption of our stack has to be, the mantra. And because It's all about generating tokens. That's his AI factories. That's what they do. They create intelligence. Jensen says it's token output is really what it's all about. And to your point, physical AI is this sort of next huge growth vector. Jobs and productivity, you sort of touched on that. The mainstream media asked them about, are you going to get, Blackwell access in China again? That I guess didn't come up in Trump's meeting with Xi. They asked about rev sharing, and Jensen sort of just sidestepped that. It's kind of, didn't really address that. But
that was a really excellent question. And that speaks to kind of the Intel argument you had before about cap table position.
Yes.
This is like such a big trade.
Yeah. Well, you want to talk about
Chris,
earnings?
hold on, I want to make this point about this cap table thing. If Nvidia becomes this power and the government takes a stake, my point was out, conversation was recorded, she was. If you remember the build out, because you're a historian, if you look at the build out of the internet, DARPA, all funded by government. Okay, Cold War funding, Lincoln Labs, MIT, Draper Labs, all that, UCLA, all these research institutions, okay, funded everything. The web was standard. We live in an era now where there's not a lot of government funding everywhere. So in essence, the private sector is funding CapEx that in these revolutions, these major platform shifts, usually was subsidized somehow. And I'm not saying that this is like normal, because it's never seen before, but if you look at all the telecom build, all those towers over the years, trillions and trillions of dollars spent. If Nvidia is making so much money and they can contribute to building a massive capacity capability, I wouldn't the government take a piece of it or turn it into a quasi utility. Because if Nvidia's AI factories go metro, and there's a city cloud in New York, and it's sovereign and open and powerful connected to edge devices, running Homeland Security and running other stuff, why wouldn't they have action? So there's an argument that would say, this is going to get you wild, but I'm not saying get involved and break up, but to just make it go accelerated faster. I mean, like, I don't know. I mean, I would be, me, I'm anti-government in business, but like, I could look at this, and I'm curious. Now, I don't want them to screw it up either, right? So I don't know. What's your take on that? Because this CapEx has to come from somewhere, right?
I mean, I'm generally against industrial policy that picks winners. But I would say this. I actually think David Sachs kind of knows what he's doing, and I've heard his rap on this. I think you nailed it. The government should be an accelerant and then back off and let the markets
get out of the way.
Yep, and let the markets take care of themselves. Remove regulations, put in public policy like we've seen in crypto with the Genius Act and eventually the Clarity Act that brings clarity and appropriate guardrails, and then let the markets decide.
And why do we have DARPA, Dave? I mean, that was funded for one reason, because we were at a Cold War with Russia.
Yeah. Right? So I mean,
so are we in a Cold War with China?
We are. Well, yeah. Hopefully not a hot war.
Yeah, I heard American made. Theme build in America. So, this is kind of a DARPA moment in this new kind of collision between China and the U.S.
I heard. I don't know if it was on like Meet the Press or Face the Nation or one of those shows this weekend. A former Biden administration official, I forget exactly what his role was, but he was basically saying, well, the problem is that, he was basically saying that Jensen, he didn't call out Jensen, but US companies that want to sell into China, it's a short-term basic, sugar rush so they can hit their numbers, but at long term, it's going to be problematic. Jensen's argument is exactly the opposite. He's basically saying, no, we're not doing this for short-term gain. We're doing this because we want the US tech stack to be the dominant tech stack. I agree with Jensen in this. And so
I do too.
The philosophy of the Biden administration was restrict access to the world's best technology because we keep that access and we'll keep that to ourselves. But to Jensen's point, if you do that, it's going to entice that it's going to defeat that 80-20 rule. So you might get, 30% or 40% or 50% of the world to be on your stack, and the other half will be on somebody else's stack. So I don't believe that Jensen's doing this for short-term gain. He doesn't need the short-term gain. I think he's doing it because he's thinking about it properly. I think the way you win is you compete and you move as fast as possible. You remove as much regulation as possible and you innovate. That's how you win. And then you get everybody using your tech stack. Will China rip it off? Yes. They're going to do that anyway. We would do the same if we were behind. So I don't agree with the previous administration's sort of policies in the tech world. I think this administration has got it right. So this is kind of long-winded answer to your question, but then put the conditions in place, be an accelerant, and then get the F out of the way.
Yeah, did you see, speaking of getting out of the way, Microsoft had a huge outage this week. I was talking to, ICE was impacted because they're a big Microsoft shop. So anyone who had Teams, anyone who had email, got kind of disrupted. And so, Sumit from Proofpoint, right?
Yeah.
Their company, and companies that have these services have to have this is a classic resilience problem, Dave. This is like we talk about all the time with Dell, cyber resilience. In this case, it's called just resilience at restoring operations. They couldn't send emails and do work.
I wrote about this when AWS went down today. Was that last Monday, right? Or was it this Monday? I can't remember now. Which was a DNS problem.
You had two cloud failures back-to-back weeks.
So what it said to me is, a well-architected availability zone strategy does not equal resilience. That you need to have a cross-AZ super cloud, essentially cross-cloud strategy in an architecture that abstracts those underlying primitives. It really is super cloud, and allows you to fail over in the case of whether it's a cloud outage from Amazon or Microsoft. So you saw several examples. Snowflake had SnowGrid, which is basically a super cloud that allowed 300 workloads, customer workloads, to fail over. I talked to Jeremy Burton, and I asked him, I said, did you guys use SnowGrid? He goes, no, we architected our own, essentially cross-cloud resilience. It's called Observe Platinum. So anybody who subscribed to Observe Platinum, they were able to fail over. But of course, by the way, observability when the network and the cloud is down is pretty important. So that was key that Observe was able to do that. But it just shows you the exposure that we all have to the cloud, and that we have to continue. It's not just about disaster recovery; it's about business resilience. We have to continue to evolve, our strategies around, supporting these applications. And so, I think that was a wake-up call. And last thing I'll say, John, is it reminds me of the shared responsibility model in the early days when we did our first reinforce, when that really wasn't well understood, the shared responsibility model. And it's like that, but it's on the customer to architect a resilient solution. Amazon's not going to do it for you. Microsoft's not going to do it. The SaaS vendors aren't going to do it. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah, I think this is going to be interesting because with AI shift and with these neo clouds and all the AI factories being kind of retooled, I wonder how that's going to change the resilience equation, because super cloud was multi-cloud, but we talked about, and then once you get super cloud up, then you start getting the horizontal scalable network effects like with AI factories. What happens then? So I think that might change how the cloud relationship is and on-prem. So back to Dell, remember Dell, the stuff we used to do with Dell on backup and recovery, all those DR conversations, okay, now coming back into play, because if you're going to do more on-premise action and you're still in the cloud, that's going to be, I'm going to have to follow up on that, Dave. That gets my curiosity, actually.
You want to talk about earnings?
What's your take on the Amazon layoffs?
Yeah.
Good.
Good. I mean, way overblown in the media. I don't think it's necessarily about, I think it's adjusting for roles in this AI era. Yeah, maybe they over-rotated during COVID, but I think it's Jassy just, looking at the business saying, what do we need? Do we need these 14,000 people, or can we cut out some layers of management? And, how do we streamline the business? I think it's just normal, and I look at it as a positive.
I agree with you on that. I think people got way over it. Now, my daughter Caroline works there, so she was obviously nervous. But it's always tough. It's tough when shit like that happens. But I think Amazon's got to worry more about the outage problem. I think that hurt their brand more than anything.
Yeah, I agree.
That was like, these cloud guys, they took it in the chin. I mean, they took a punch to the face on reputation, and literally business goes down.
I know, but then look at the numbers this quarter. It's like unbelievable. So, I mean, so I was just doing, going through listening to the earnings calls and reading the transcripts. So as you know, AWS grew 20%, up from 17% last quarter. Azure, 39%. This is constant currency. GCP I got GCP at 40%. It was Google Cloud overall grew at 34%. I got GCP growing at 40%. I think Alibaba is going to have an accelerated quarter. So AWS at a $33 billion quarter and accelerated its growth. Azure, I got a 21.7 billion, GCP at about 7.4, 7.5 billion. And so I'm looking at a year where the big AWS, Azure, and GCP combined are gonna do 244 billion, which is they're growing at 20 to 25% at this scale. It's just phenomenal. And then you look at the capex, John. Microsoft, is signaling 95 to 100 billion in 2026. Amazon, 135 billion, of which probably 100 billion is AWS. Google, 100 to 110 billion. Meta, 100 billion. You're talking about over 400 billion in capex at about a 25% growth rate relative to this year.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Continues. I mean,
that's my point.
And by the way, who's the big winner in all this? Nvidia.
That's what I'm saying. It's kind of like a DARPA moment. I mean, this is like, why all the tech research that fueled the computer revolution came out of the arms race and Cold War, right? So, we saw that firsthand, especially living in Massachusetts. A lot of MIT, a lot of Northeastern action there, Lincoln Labs, Draper Labs, a lot of, and then California, you had Salamos. And by the way, Nvidia had a nice little, thing with their supercomputing going into Los Alamos labs.
Oh, good
Secretary
call.
of Energy.
Talk about that. Yes.
Secretary of Energy. I think there's going to be this cultural revolution happening in America where people are like, let's fix the shit. The grid, new energy sources, build AI factories in all over Texas and Phoenix. And, I think we can get good at building these AI factories. Just let's kick ass.
Yeah.
I love the message.
And then
Amazon is just, they're traveling so much cash. Why? Because they win. The rich get richer, right? In this game.
I'm glad you brought up the labs. This yet another tentacle of Nvidia supporting innovation. The deal they did with Cisco, right? I mean, you got the world's leading network supplier and a giant install base, and they got a partnership with Nvidia there. It's just they got their hands everywhere. They're basically taking Intel's playbook from the 90s and expanding it like 100x with a software layer that is just amazing. It's hard not to be really excited about Nvidia. I will say this, and I talked to Gerstner about this. I saw him when he was prepping for his pregame. I said, Brad, I know you're like a Super Bowl. I'm a big fan. But the narrative out there is that, there's no bubble. The circular investment's not a big deal. And I heard an analyst on Wall Street talking about how, the difference here is that none of these GPUs are underutilized, whereas the dark fiber was all underutilized back in 99 and 2000. The fact is that actually that's not true. There are a lot of GPUs that are underutilized. If you can find an enterprise that has 1,000 or 1,500 GPUs, you'll find that they are underutilized. Not the neo clouds, not the clouds, but the enterprises, because they don't have the skills, they don't have the data sets, the data models, the processes are very stovepiped, and they're struggling to get full utilization, aka ROI, out of that infrastructure, those installed GPUs. So they have to solve that problem. The other thing is, we heard this from a number of folks, is, these GPUs are depreciating at a very rapid pace. Within 2 years, they're going to be, it's like driving a car off the lot times 10. And so, when you think about vendor financing, a lot of companies are being conservative, taking the short end of the curve, doing, 2-year financing deals. And so the neo clouds have to monetize, and the clouds have to monetize within that 2-year period. I think they can do that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the enterprises have figured that out yet. So that's a gap right now. And that's something that, we have to pay attention to. Gerster said, yeah, but you're assuming that doesn't change. I'm like, I'm not assuming anything. I'm just pointing out that people aren't talking about that. And that is something that has to be addressed. And I think the way it gets addressed, John, is it's going to start with data. Don't start by buying a bunch of GPUs. Start by thinking about what use cases you have and what the data stack looks like, or what your data model looks like for that use case. Get that in order first, and understand the processes that will support that, and then, bring in the tech. But just don't just buy a bunch of GPUs and start playing with them, because you're gonna waste a lot of money.
And there's going to be services out there like Vellante and some other entrepreneurs that are going to have GPU services. So I think nailing the workflow, you're right on the money. Get your data and workflows nailed down, and just pick a use case you can modernize, that you can know it's good enough to pay for it. And that's what Jensen was saying in speech. Again, so many nuggets in his notion that AI is not a tool, it's work. It's a worker. And what he means by that, it should be doing work, not just being a tool. Yeah, there's a tool, Copilot right now, being a augmentation for human loop. But when agents come in, it'll actually do work. Right? So that's, if a company in the enterprise doesn't identify what work to apply the AI to, they'll never get good results. So that's the playbook. Get a workflow, automate it, apply AI to it, grind it out, and then apply the agent model to it. That's my take. I mean, look at, we are doing the AI Factory series. I'm glad you brought that up, because in New York and Palo Alto, Boston, we are doing interviews with leaders who are doing this. So they're sharing, and I think we should be amplifying that, because everyone is scratching their head. How do I roll this stuff out to the enterprise as fast as possible? Because the nuggets in there to innovate on are good. The problem is I'm just not going to put it out in the wild, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I think the CapEx says to me this is going to continue for a while, because that can hide any lack of ROI in the enterprise. But I do think that the enterprise has to figure this out. I think it's a legitimate, real gap that exists, and I think our AI Factory series can help educate folks on that. And with all the startups we're bringing in, hopefully we can close that gap, because there's a real need to bring, intelligence to the enterprise, on-prem, hybrid, to your point about edge. And it's a complicated matter. This idea that, oh, you could just start throwing in agents around and it'll solve all your problems. It's much more complicated than that. And the other thing, sorry, it's related, is the deal that Nvidia did with Palantir, which to me was one of the more interesting announcements that they made. Why? Because of this very issue. Palantir is all about harmonizing that data, bringing in processes, getting your act together so you can apply intelligence and actually have an outcome. And there aren't a lot of companies who can do what Palantir does. Palantir, Celonis, Salesforce to a certain extent, ServiceNow is headed there. Some others are sort of dancing around it, but I would say Palantir is probably one of the most robust examples. Now, granted, there's a lot of services around it as well, but that's the point. It's the exception that proves the rule as to how hard this is. So where we want to get to from an ROI standpoint is rather than having to build it yourself and spend tens of millions of dollars deploying this stuff, you can actually buy a solution, essentially off the shelf, maybe with a little bit of accelerant services, but then get up and running and get to ROI quickly.
I think it's so right on. First of all, I'm smiling because when Nvidia does their keynotes, they talk about computer science, and then now they throw in ontologies, which is the premise of the Palantir's entire platform. I think you're right. I think Palantir's template example of what enterprises should look at as a success model, not in the aggregate, but in their philosophy and the way they layer on top of Nvidia's AI factories is a good working narrative to saying, okay, now it's different because it's complicated. They're Palantir and they're fully loaded with the, with all the action, they're winning business. It's comprehensive. But if you just zoom out and saying what makes it so good, it's the way they sit horizontally with the ontologies and how graph databases are in there. Things are all laid out and it's designed for one purpose, to be the fastest, smartest system to take all kinds of data points. This is stuff that's also music to your ears and George Gilbert, because this is what we've been doing as research team for 3 years, is studying digital twins, studying how agents might evolve, harmonization layers, as you pointed out, and how that data control plane, the semantic layer, whatever you want to call it, sits. And I think Palantir is a working template for an enterprise to at least learn from, saying, how do we apply our stuff, data into that kind of template? Not exactly, but you know what I'm saying? It's like almost like a reference architecture for an enterprise. And if I'm a large enterprise, I'll study that and say, okay, can I replicate it and customize it to what we have? And I think that's jumped out at me at the keynote, like it was glaringly obvious. And that's why I think they showcased it. And that's why you and George were pointing out Salesforce is a lot like Palantir. And if they can pull that off. Another little weird sidebar there. I mean, we were just at Dreamforce, right? It's like they could pull that off.
They're working on it. I think they're not necessarily as functional and robust as like a Celonis or a Palantir, but they're definitely on their way. They announced what they call it Data 360, which is kind of Data Cloud 2.0 or 1.5. So they're doing the engineering work. I think people way underestimate Benioff and Salesforce. It's sort of self-inflicted, by the way, with their, onerous pricing model that they've, extracted rents for the longest time. But I think Benioff is a visionary, and he realizes that he had to do the hard engineering work to dominate this next era. And George thinks they're the next. The gorilla is gonna be awakened.
Well, Dave, we got to wrap it up. I just realized I have an interview at 4 o'clock Eastern time. It's Halloween. It's crazy in New York. I forget how crazy it is out in Halloween in New York. And I don't think I've ever been in New York on Halloween before. So,
wow. Yeah. Well, I'll probably see a lot of crazies. So like
they do the epic Michael Jackson Thriller dance in West Village, and they work on it 2 days in advance. And everyone comes out in a costume. They do the Thriller down the street. It's like packed. It's like a parade.
I'm down here in Nashville. I've only been once. I was at a Vandy, Alabama game and my friend was coaching, and it's awesome. I mean, people are going all out for Halloween. We're gonna go out tonight and have some fun.
All right. Well, have a great time.
Thanks, John. Good seeing you this week.
Tennessee.
Great job at GTC. You crushed it, and awesome content coming out of there. Your posts, your blog posts, your videos, amazing.
Yeah, a lot more action. I'm gonna try to relax. Tyler's coming into New York, so I'm gonna see him and his friends. So
Great.
we'll chat a bit later, Dave.
We'll see you next week. All right. See you, man. Thanks, everybody.